Faithfulness is probably the most underappreciated life accelerator. And one of the reasons it's so underappreciated is we often at the time don't recognize how it's producing momentum, how it's empowering our life. It's generally only later upon reflection when we look back where we see this tremendous impact that it had. But remember, God never promotes above our level of faithfulness. But it also produces what's called a positive feedback loop. Faithfulness brings God's promotion. With that promotion comes greater blessing, but also greater responsibility, requiring greater faithfulness, leading to further promotion, further blessing, further responsibility, and so on. And it becomes a circular loop that the more faithful we are actually produces this tremendous acceleration throughout life. It will take you places you could never have dreamed. But today, I want to focus on three aspects that are either overlooked or cycles that can appear discouraging until we understand the process. So aspect number one is faithfulness in those cycles when it doesn't seem like we're making progress, where you're doing what you know you're supposed to be doing. You are being faithful. You're applying yourself in that situation, that circumstance, but it doesn't seem to be moving forward. Now, this is a cycle where people can either get discouraged and give up, or they can kind of become desperate and wind up in distractions that aren't really empowering them. And this is when we need to understand something I call compression. That God never lets that faithfulness go to waste. And so what happens is all of your faithfulness in that cycle where you don't see progress, you don't see movement, it's not wasted. And it takes real fortitude, it takes real inner strength to continue in that faithfulness when you're not necessarily seeing the results yet. Now, compression means all that you're putting in there is being pressure. It's all being compressed into that one place. When God releases it, this is when you find those profound leaps forward. And again, only upon reflection do you realize, yes, this wasn't overnight success. This was an entire period of faithful compression that finally released, and it wasn't a small step forward. It wasn't incremental. It was this profound leap forward. Think of Joseph in prison. He continued in faithfulness when it didn't look like it was working, when it was discouraging. Think of when he interpreted the wine steward's dream, and the wine steward implied strongly that he was going to tell Pharaoh about Joseph. But then 2 years go by and nothing. That was discouraging. But Joseph's faithfulness was compressing. And then what happened? God then released it, and there was this profound acceleration from prison to power. So we have to we have to develop that inner strength, that fortitude, that when we aren't seeing results, recognizing faithfulness is one of God's most profound principles. And until we get clarity on other things, other focuses, shifts, other steps to take, continuing in the faithfulness, continuing in what you know to do until you do see those results. And the second one, and this is one of the most overlooked, and it's being faithful with what doesn't belong to us. Whether as an employee, whether you're not appreciated, and so on. That when you're faithful with what doesn't belong to you, God gives you your own. It's so easy to wind up, to allow discouragement to distract and derail, especially in the areas where you're not appreciated. This isn't for my benefit, it's for whatever, whether it's a company, so on. And that is one of the most crucial tests that God will, again, never promote when we're not faithful with what belongs to others. Because then we're demonstrating that character, that very nature of God. And that's when we have to at least be aware and recognize that need, the necessity for that faithfulness. And that recognizing in the process, God will open a door, produce a platform that will elevate you, whatever the case may be. That the promise is when we're faithful with what belongs to another, God gives you your own. This is one of the most powerful, transformative things that so many miss because it runs so counter to our natural thinking. And number 3 is complacency. That we've been faithful in the past. We've achieved a certain degree of success. We've seen that acceleration. And then we get comfortable. And I'm not saying we don't continue in some degree of faithfulness, but we're not pressing forward to the same degree. And the consequence of that, and I've talked about it before, is what you see is called the blessing fading. See, God's mercy is He doesn't cut off the blessing, but then what happens is we are beginning to turn off the flow. We're beginning to constrict the flow of His blessing. And we often don't recognize it until later when things become critical. It's a challenge for all of us. That this is a great opportunity to reflect on the areas of your life, the assignments God has put in your life, whether it's in employment, in your family. Everyone has a ministry, whether you realize it or not. Your life is a ministry. Whatever those assignments are in your life, this is a great opportunity to reflect upon that and ask God to begin to show you ways to be more effective in your faithfulness, to increase your faithfulness, and watch God accelerate your life to a whole new level.